Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be pinch hitting for Professor Corbin. It's very interesting to be part of this panel because both ladies played against Cheryl Miller, who I consider the finest female basketball player ever. And when I was with Gannett Newspapers in Westchester, I was assigned to cover the Hall of Fame inductions in Springfield, Massachusetts. Drove up to Springfield, and who was in that Hall of Fame induction class? Cheryl Miller. So I got a chance to meet her and interview her and tell her that I enjoyed watching her play in the 80s on the USC dynasty. And a decade later, I was with the Indianapolis Star, and I covered the Indiana Pacers. Who was the best player on the Indiana Pacers at the time?
Her brother.
Her baby brother, Reggie Miller. He used to call me the Reverend because I was so serious-minded. But I've enjoyed covering sports, really documenting it. And I grew up in the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn, and there's this long-held saying in the black community, if you really want to know what's going on in the black community, go to the barber shop. Well, that might have been true in your neighborhoods, but it wasn't necessarily true in mine. Because when I'd go into the barber shop, sit in the chair, hey son, what do you want to be? I want to be a writer. Well, you can't do that. They're not going to let you do that. The mysterious they. But I was always determined to chronicle sports. For some reason, I didn't identify so much with the athletes as I did with the broadcasters and the writers. And that became my life goal, to become a sports journalist. And I chose Fordham University because I found out about all the journalists they turned out. And when I was on the New York Yankees beat, for example, of the 8 Yankees beat writers, that means the 8 newspapers that cover the team full-time, home and away, spring training, regular season playoffs, of the 8 beat writers covering the Yankees, 4 were Fordham graduates. And Michael Kay, who does their games on the Yes Network now, he was on radio at the time. He's a Fordham graduate. And Vin Scully, the voice of the Dodgers since 1950, 82 years old, still doing games by himself, all 9 innings. No props, no tricks, just a man and a microphone. He's a Fordham graduate. I knew about these people and I was inspired by them. And you mentioned the OJ game. I had a chance to cover that. That's the most bizarre sporting event I've ever covered. Game 5 of the 1994 NBA Finals, the Knicks against the Rockets. There was a strange buzz going around through Madison Square Garden. And I should tell you that if you're an accredited member of the media and you're sitting at courtside, or if they put you in the upper deck, you have a monitor. Basically, that's yours to keep track of statistics or to watch replays. But you don't have to watch the game. And during that game, almost nobody was watching the game. It was weird. Yeah, Patrick Ewing would dunk, very little reaction. Anthony Mason would reject a shot, or Charles Oakley would take a charge, almost no reaction. John Starks would drain a three-pointer, almost no reaction. Everyone saying, what's happening with OJ? What's happening with OJ? That slow Bronco chase through the streets of Southern California, ending up at home in Brentwood. And after the game, after the Knicks won Game 5, at Madison Square Garden, very little reaction. We go downstairs to do our post-game interviews, and we're talking to Derek Harper and John Starks and Patrick Ewing, or Hakeem Olajuwon, Kenny Smith on the other side. What happened to OJ? Did OJ kill himself? I heard OJ kill himself. It was a bizarre night. But those are the things that I'll always remember as a sports journalist, to have a chance to document these moments, and covering the 1996 Summer Olympics in Atlanta and having a chance to interview my all-time favorite athlete, Muhammad Ali. He was at the boxing venue at Georgia Tech. This was after the bombing. I'll back up a bit. There were really 2 Olympics, one before the Centennial Park bombing, when everything was open, and in Atlanta, the first southern city to host an Olympics. They put their best face on, and everything was efficient. Everything ran smoothly. Everybody got along, until some jerk set off a bomb that exploded in Centennial Olympic Park, almost miraculously killing only 1 person. But it happened, and that changed everything. I used to be able to just walk right in. All the journalists could just walk right into Georgia Tech, because I was covering boxing. That's where the boxing matches were held, at Alexander Coliseum, where Georgia Tech usually plays their basketball games. You could just walk right in. They would know your face. Hey, how you doing? But after the bombing, it took more than an hour for everybody, because they checked everything. That became the new normal. What happens now in most of the country after 9/11 happened in Atlanta, Georgia, after the bombing in 1996. Everyone was suspicious of everyone else. But moving ahead to the finals of the boxing, the United States won only 1 gold medal. that year, which was an upset. Usually we have one of the better teams in the world in boxing, but that year only one boxer, a middleweight from Philadelphia named David Reed, made it to the final, and he fought against a Cuban named Alejandro Duverville. Duverville was supposed to dominate the fight. He was considered one of those great Cuban boxers who would not turn pro because he wouldn't be allowed to. They were afraid he would defect. In fact, one Cuban boxer did defect during the games. So that was a news story that we had a chance to cover. But in the final of the middleweight division, it was David Reed against Duverville. Duverville was way ahead on points. Reed needed a knockout. That's the only way he could win. So it was like something straight out of Hollywood, except it was real. David Reed unleashed a left hook, knocked Duverville on his back, won the fight. And there's Muhammad Ali at ringside, and he was struggling with his health then, as he does now. But even at that time, they did not want reporters to get close to Muhammad Ali. But I figured this is the only time I'm going to have a chance to talk to Muhammad Ali. So I just made a beeline to his seat in the front row. I said, "Mr. Ali, what do you think of David Reed?" He said, "He's a bad boy." That was my quote. And it was just thrilled to get a quote from Muhammad Ali and put it in my article. And that's one of the things I've enjoyed about being a sports writer. You get to chronicle what happens. And I've been inspired over the years by the athletes that I've been able to cover and watch perform. One of the questions on the flyer for this event, discussing what the historical arc of the African-American athlete. I contend that this is as fine as it has ever been, as strong as it has ever been for African-Americans in sports, because we have in Tiger Woods, whether you want to claim him or not, he claims to be a Caballasian, a word he made up, but we know what he is. The greatest golfer in the world, arguably the greatest golfer ever. He needs to win 5 more majors to pass Jack Nicklaus, and then everyone else can shut up. But he has 14, and he has 77 tournament victories, more than Jack Nicklaus. People don't want to talk about these things. He already has won more tournaments than Jack Nicklaus, but just not as many majors. Anyway, this is the Tiger Woods era, let's face it. In tennis, 2 sisters from Compton, Serena and Venus Williams. Serena is still the #1 player in the world. For many years, they were 1 and 2, and the only reason Venus doesn't have more than 7 major titles is because she kept losing to her kid sister in finals. So that's what we see now. The NBA with LeBron James and Dwayne Wade and Kevin Durant. There have never been so many super athletes. But what I would like to see after they retire is see them go the way of a Magic Johnson and get into ownership. Satish made the point very well. But they can't do that while they're playing because they need that single-minded devotion. Magic Johnson wasn't thinking about owning a team while he was winning championships with the Lakers Showtime. You have to be focused on that. Michael Jordan wasn't thinking about owning an NBA franchise when he was winning 6 championships for the Bulls. It's what these athletes do after they retire that I will be very interested in chronicling. Hopefully they don't blow their money. Hopefully they don't fall off the map, so to speak. Hopefully they have a desire to hold power and empower others. That's what I would love to see. And taking an example from baseball, because I covered the New York Yankees for many years, I'm still very close to the franchise. What Robinson Cano did early this year, I think is very significant. He's going to be a free agent at the end of the year when his contract is up. He's going to make big money anyway, no matter who his agent is. Robinson Cano is going to make huge money. He fired his agent, Scott Boras, who is notorious for getting his athletes the best offer, even if it's not necessarily the right fit. Sending Alex Rodriguez from Seattle to Texas was a bad move, for example. Sending Pudge Rodriguez years ago to the Detroit Tigers was a bad move. He tends to not negotiate, Boras I'm talking about, not negotiate during the season, wait until the season's over and basically put the athlete out as if he's on a block, you know. For the highest bidder, you get his services. Robinson Cano doesn't want to go that way. He's fired Scott Boras and hired Jay-Z. Not just Jay-Z, but Jay-Z's company, Rockaware, which is affiliated with CAA, Creative Artists Agency. They're going to negotiate a big, fat contract for Robinson Cano and keep him in New York, and it will also establish Jay-Z as a sports owner. He's already divested his 1% of the Brooklyn Nets. Right. When you see headlines, Jay-Z sells Nets, he had 1%. He didn't own the Nets. Prokhorov owns the Nets. But Jay-Z will be a basketball owner, sports owner of basketball players, football players, baseball players, who knows what else. That's empowering for African Americans. That happened because a prominent Latino athlete, Robinson Cano, has given Jay-Z an opportunity to get into the agents game. And I'd like to see more of that. Athletes who know they're going to make big money anyway, empowering others and giving them a chance. The NFL draft begins tonight. The prominent black athletes like Geno Smith, who probably will be the first quarterback taken, he's an African American. Now, what if he said, I'm going to hire a black agent? What if all the prominent African American athletes who are going to become millionaires this week, no matter who they sign with, what if they all decided to empower the few African American agents that are there? That would make them bigger, that would give them more cachet, and the next crop of draft eligibles would be more likely to sign with them. That's how Drew Rosenhaus got to be who he is, representing football players, because of word of mouth and, oh, he'll take care of you. We need to see more of that among athletes in basketball, football, baseball, and all the sports. Now, you notice I went and grabbed this book very quickly because this is my first book, Breaking the Ice, The Black Experience in Professional Hockey. Now, why did I write this book? Because I think I was the only young African American in the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn who loved hockey. It was very hard to find anybody to talk about the sport with. And it became my goal when I was a kid to grow up to cover hockey. Now, I didn't know anybody else who thought that way, but I did. And I thought it was possible because of what I had learned about what Jackie Robinson overcame, the first African American in Major League Baseball. What Muhammad Ali overcame. 3.5 years were taken away from him at the height of his career because he refused to go to the Vietnam War. I ain't got nothing against no Viet Cong, he said. They stripped him of his title for 3.5 years. Yes, he came back and won it again eventually, but imagine how much greater his career could have been. But what if they tell LeBron James tomorrow, you can't play basketball for the next 3.5 years? What if they were to tell RG3, you can't quarterback for the next 3.5 years? But Muhammad Ali overcame that. And I admire their struggle. I gained a certain strength from it. It made me more determined to succeed in my little corner of sports because of what they were able to overcome. So I'd just like to read to you from the introduction to my hockey book because I think it'll just provide some insight into why I decided to write this and also tell you about a sort of a subset of African Canadian athletes that don't get as much recognition as they deserve. I started this way. Sports were discussed and debated constantly in the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn, New York, where I grew up. Just try to argue that Walt Clyde Frazier was a better basketball guard than Earl the Pearl Monroe, or that Smokin' Joe Frazier was a superior boxer to Muhammad Ali, or that Reggie Jackson was a more fearsome slugger than Hank Aaron, and emotions would run high for hours, if not days. Although I weighed in on every argument, one sport that I learned to love was never discussed: hockey. In my predominantly black neighborhood, nobody played hockey, nobody watched hockey, and nobody who looked like us played hockey, or so we thought. I became a hockey fan during the 1970-71 National Hockey League season because in those days, my 10-year-old eyes watched every sport possible. In an era before 24-hour sports cable networks, New York Rangers games were shown on Channel 9 every Saturday night, and I got hooked. I loved hockey's rapid pace, fierce hitting, accent on teamwork, and yes, the fighting. I also liked the way Guy Lafleur's blonde hair flowed on his end-to-end dashes that often resulted in a Montreal Canadiens goal against my Rangers. I enjoyed the challenge of trying to follow the puck on my little 12-inch black and white television set. I appreciated the symmetry of the constant personnel changes that make hockey resemble a crazy ballet on ice. But my devotion to hockey was a singular pleasure. There was nowhere for me to learn to play, nowhere to skate, no one to accompany me to a game, no one with whom I could talk hockey. I remember being so enthusiastic about hockey on the morning I stayed up past 1 a.m. to listen to Marv Albert's play-by-play on WNBC radio of the Rangers' 3-2 playoff win over the Chicago Blackhawks. It happened at Madison Square Garden. Blank stares from schoolmates suggested I was describing something that had happened on Pluto.